There is no evidence that Tim Walz even knew this guy. There is no evidence of any relationship between them. Even the conspiracy theory doesn't make sense. I'm going to now give you the ammo to respond when people make these ridiculous claims. I want to talk about the Minnesota case, which I think is a super important issue. And this is the arrest of Vance Bolter, the suspect in the shooting of these Minnesota state legislators, Representative Melissa Hortman, who's the former Democratic Speaker, her husband Mark, and the shooting of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette. And the minute I heard this, I was stunned it wasn't a bigger story, because I heard it at like 9:20 in the morning, or I saw it on social media, and I was amazed that none of the cable networks were covering it. And I actually called in to the folks at Mediaite, and I said, hey, guys, why are we not covering this? They said, oh, yeah, we're working on it. I'm like, working on it? Like, this is huge. It's a huge story. This is someone targeting legislators, clearly because of their politics. So Mediaite gets the story up. But quickly, the narrative becomes, from some right-leaning influencers, that this is a guy who Tim Walz appointed. This is a Tim Walz guy, right? And I have to say, in the early hours before many of the mainstream media entities were even reporting his name, that's what was going around, which is that this guy had been appointed by Tim Walz to a government position. And I'll tell you, Mediaite had something up like that as well. And at the time, I kept wondering, well, what does this mean he got appointed? Just didn't make any sense. Well, now we know a whole lot more. But let me be clear. Influential conservative influencers like Benny Johnson, Rogan O'Handley, Mike Cernovich, all suggested not only was this guy connected to Tim Walz, but that Tim Walz may have actually ordered the hit. Right? That's how cuckoo stuff got in the far-right media sphere. And, Cernovich speculated at 1:30 that Walz might have ordered a hit. The vice president candidate for the Democrat Party is directly connected to a domestic terrorist. That's confirmed. The only question is whether Tim Walz himself ordered the political hit against a rival who voted against Walz's plan to give free health care to illegals. This guy O'Handley then reposts saying, did Tim Walz order a hit job of a Democratic state legislator that voted against his agenda? Just asking questions, right? I'm just wondering, just asking questions. Benny Johnson says that Walz personally knew the suspect who just committed multiple assassinations of Tim Walz's political enemies in the state of Minnesota. And more importantly, more widely spread was this idea of the Walz appointee, right? So let's dig in on this stuff a little bit, because I know I've been asked about this. I'm sure many of you have been asked about this, saying, well, it seems kind of confusing, right? He's targeting all these Democrats, but he was a Walz appointee. Oh, well, maybe he was coming at them from the left because he was an extreme leftist. So let's dig into this. So I'm going to now give you the ammo to respond when people make these ridiculous claims. Democratic Governor Mark Dayton, who served from 2011 to 19, appointed Bolter as what's called a private sector representative on the governor's Workforce Development Board. That's what we're talking about. The Workforce Development Board. In 2019, Walz reappoints Bolter to serve on the group as a business member. All right, what is the group? The board has about 60 members. Over 40 of them are appointed by the governor and analyzes and makes recommendations to the governor and the state legislature on policies related to the workforce. Things that include talent development, addressing barriers to employment. And according to its website, the goal is to help Minnesota maintain a globally competitive labor force. That's what we're talking about, right? There is no evidence that Tim Walz even knew this guy. There is no evidence of any relationship between them. This is apparently one of thousands of appointments that the governor makes during his term. But hey, why let the facts get in the way of a good story, right? Now let's dig in even a little bit more. Because that's all they got, right? The fact that he's reappointed to some statewide advisory board where over 40 people are appointed by the governor. And they're saying it's confirmed. He knew him. Confirmed for his reappointment, right? These appointments to a workforce board is not like getting a cabinet position or even working in the governor's office. There is no indication of any relationship with this guy. And all of his targets were Democrats. So one of the theories here is, oh, well, he was mad at former Speaker Hortman because she was the only Democrat who voted with Republicans to pass a budget bill that removes adult immigrants in the U.S. illegally from the state's health care program. That's an interesting conspiracy theory, right? Oh, he's a leftist who's mad at her. Well, here's the problem with that theory. The other representative who he went after, Hoffman, didn't vote for that bill. And furthermore, Hortman had previously voted with Democrats. And I'm going to read now, because some of this is coming from PolitiFact. Some of this is now coming from Fox 59 in Minnesota. And some of this is coming from the Associated Press. So now I'm going to read a little bit from the Associated Press. Hortman had served as House Speaker for 6 years when the 2024 elections cost Democrats their slim majority. She led fellow Democrats in boycotting House sessions for almost a month, starting in mid-January, to prevent the GOP from using a temporary vacancy in a Democratic seat to cement control over the chamber. Oh, yeah, sounds like a real conservative. She wanted to protect state health coverage for adult immigrants living in the U.S. illegally, a liberal policy enacted on her watch as Speaker in 2023. Let me be clear, and I'll repeat that. Protecting state health coverage for adult immigrants was a policy passed on her watch as Speaker in 2023. But when the only budget deal that she could broker included a GOP bill to cut that coverage, she provided the single Democratic vote in the House, securing its passage so the state government would remain funded for the next 2 years. But Hoffman, the other representative who was shot, who fortunately survived, didn't vote for that. So even the conspiracy theory doesn't make sense. Because the rest of his list of people that he was going after were all Democrats and people who were supportive of abortion rights. How do we know that? Because we heard it today in a press conference. The AUSA Joseph Thompson, this is going to be number 6. Basically, he said there was no manifesto, but there was a list of people who he was going after. Here's what they all had in common.
Obviously, his primary motive was to go out and murder people. Now, they were all elected officials. They were all Democrats. Beyond that, I think it's just way too speculative for anyone that's reviewed these materials to know and to say what was motivating him in terms of ideology or specific issues. There's a lot of...
Or abortion rights supporters?
There were some abortion rights supporters, I believe, on the list. But again, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of names on, hundreds of pages of documents that were recovered with his writings on them.
Did he confess
5 seconds.
details after he was apprehended last night?
I'm not going to comment on that at this time.
And so you have some on the right still trying to suggest that, this guy was a Walz guy who was going after, I don't even understand it anymore. I mean, at least when the theory was, he goes after the speaker because he's further to the left than she is, and he's mad about the fact that she signed on to the budget. Okay. But why do you go after the other guy? Why do you have a list full of Democrats, only Democrats, and people who are pro-choice? It doesn't make any sense. The facts matter here. It's why I've spent so much time assembling all of these facts for you. And again, some have even had to correct Right Angle News Network, which is a right-wing news entity, had to post a correction because they were trying to lump in both of the victims, Speaker Hortman and Senator Hoffman, on that one policy, and it didn't work. I don't know that the finger pointing helps, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, you see, this is what happens. This is what happens, because I think that there are loons on the left and there are loons on the right. And I think either one of them can take what they hear and what they see in media and completely warp it. But what you can't do is suggest that somehow this shooter is affiliated with Walz. He's a Walz guy. He clearly hated Democrats. He clearly hated abortion. That is clearly what was motivating him. Now, exactly what led to it, I don't know. And again, I'm not going to start the finger wagging. But what I am going to do is insist that we get these things right, that we at least base them on facts. And the facts are that this guy was not part of the Walz administration. He was not part of the cabinet. He was not part of the government. He was reappointed to some board where the governor has like 41 picks. And it's not just that. I want to play this. This is his roommate talking to CBS News about his politics.
I was a Trump supporter. Voted for Trump. You like Trump. I like Trump. Nobody's happy with the government. Everybody's happy. Not happy what this politician does or that politician does. But you don't go on a shooting spree. It's just, that's why I hate even talking about it, because it's so crazy.
He was a Trump supporter. Does that mean Donald Trump's to blame? No. But it sure as heck doesn't mean that Tim Walz is to blame. And by the way, you listen to President Trump talk about this, and he sounds like he's blaming Tim Walz. This is an interview he did with Rachel Scott from ABC News yesterday. This is number 19.
Yeah, I spoke to the president this morning briefly on the phone, and I did ask him about the shooting, his reaction, and whether he had any plans to call the Democratic Minnesota governor. We know that Vice President J.D. Vance did speak to him, and the president said, quote, "It's a terrible thing. I think he's a terrible governor. I think he is a grossly incompetent person. He says, I may call him, I may call other people too.
Unbelievable. Even when something like this happens, the president can't just get above it and just say, it's terrible. Of course, I'll call the governor as we try to coordinate. It's just astonishing. When you have a friend or relative who follows news a bit and they say to you, well, you know, this guy was a Walz appointee. You can direct him to my YouTube and play what I just laid out, which are the facts. And the facts are that that's nonsense.